The Tale of Two Bad Mice. Once upon a time there was a very beautiful doll's house. It was red brick with white windows, and it had real muslin curtains and a front door and a chimney. It belonged to two dolls called Lucinda and Jane. At least it belonged to Lucinda, but she never ordered meals. Jane was the cook, but she never did any cooking, because the dinner had been bought ready made in a box full of shavings. There were two red lobsters and a ham, a fish, a pudding, and some pears and oranges. They would not come off the plates, but they were extremely beautiful. One morning Lucinda and Jane had gone out for a drive in the dolls' perambulator. There was no one in the nursery, and it was very quiet. Presently there was a little scuffling, scratching noise in a corner near the fireplace, where there was a hole under the skirting board. Tom Thumb put out his head for a moment, and then popped it in again. Tom Thumb was a mouse. A minute afterwards Hunca Munca, his wife, put her head out too, and when she saw that there was no one in the nursery, she ventured out on the oilcloth under the coal box. The doll's house stood at the other side of the fireplace. Tom Thumb and Hunca Munca went cautiously across the hearthrug. They pushed the front door. It was not fast. Tom Thumb and Hunca Munca went upstairs and peeped into the dining room. Then they squeaked with joy. Such a lovely dinner was laid out upon the table. There were tin spoons, and lead knives and forks, and two dolly chairs, all so convenient. Tom Thumb set to work at once to carve the ham. It was a beautiful shiny yellow streaked with red. The knife crumpled up and hurt him. He put his finger in his mouth. "It is not boiled enough. It is hard. You have a try, Hunca Munca." Hunca Munca stood up in her chair and chopped at the ham with another lead knife. "It's as hard as the hams at the cheesemonger's," said Hunca Munca. The ham broke off the plate with a jerk and rolled under the table. "Let it alone," said Tom Thumb. "Give me some fish, Hunca Munca." Hunca Munca tried every tin spoon in turn. The fish was glued to the dish. Then Tom Thumb lost his temper. He put the ham in the middle of the floor and hit it with the tongs and with the shovel. Bang! Bang! Smash! Smash! The ham flew all into pieces, for underneath the shiny paint it was made of nothing but plaster. Then there was no end to the rage and disappointment of Tom Thumb and Hunca Munca. They broke up the pudding, the lobsters, the pears, and the oranges. As the fish would not come off the plate, they put it into the red-hot, crinkly paper fire in the kitchen, but it would not burn either. Tom Thumb went up the kitchen chimney and looked out at the top. There was no soot. While Tom Thumb was up the chimney, Hunca Munca had another disappointment. She found some tiny canisters upon the dresser, labeled rice, coffee, sago, but when she turned them upside down there was nothing inside except red and blue beads. Then those mice set to work to do all the mischief they could, especially Tom Thumb. He took Jane's clothes out of the chest of drawers in her bedroom, and he threw them out of the top floor window. But Hunca Munca had a frugal mind. After pulling half the feathers out of Lucinda's bolster, she remembered that she herself was in want of a feather bed. With Tom Thumb's assistance, she carried the bolster downstairs and across the hearth rug. It was difficult to squeeze the bolster into the mouse hole, but they managed it somehow. Then Hunca Munca went back and fetched a chair, a bookcase, a bird cage, and several small odds and ends. The bookcase and the bird cage refused to go into the mouse hole. Hunca Munca left them behind the coal box and went to fetch a cradle. Hunca Munca was just returning with another chair when suddenly there was a noise of talking outside upon the landing. The mice rushed back to their hole, and the dolls came into the nursery. What a sight met the eyes of Jane and Lucinda! Lucinda sat upon the upset kitchen stove and stared, and Jane leaned against the kitchen dresser and smiled, but neither of them made any remark. The bookcase and the bird cage were rescued from under the coal box, but Hunca Munca has got the cradle and some of Lucinda's clothes. She also has some useful pots and pans, and several other things. The little girl that the doll's house belonged to said, "I will get a doll dressed like a policeman." But the nurse said, "I will set a mouse trap." So that is the story of the two bad mice, but they were not so very, very naughty after all, because Tom Thumb paid for everything he broke. He found a crooked sixpence under the hearth rug, and upon Christmas Eve he and Hunca Munca stuffed it into one of the stockings of Lucinda and Jane. And very early every morning, before anybody is awake, Hunca Munca comes with her dustpan and her broom to sweep the dolly's house. End of the Tale of Two Bad Mice.
The Tale of Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. Once upon a time there was a little girl called Lucy who lived at a farm called Littletown. She was a good little girl, only she was always losing her pocket handkerchiefs. One day little Lucy came into the farmyard crying. Oh, she did cry so! "I've lost my pocket hankin. 3 hankins and a penny. Have you seen them, Tabby Kitten?" The kitten went on washing her white paws. So Lucy asked a speckled hen, "Sally Hennypenny, have you found 3 pocket hankins?" But the speckled hen ran into the barn clucking, "I go barefoot, barefoot, barefoot." And then Lucy asked Cock Robin sitting on a twig. Cock Robin looked sideways at Lucy with his bright black eye, and he flew over a stile and away. Lucy climbed upon the stile and looked up at the hill behind Littletown, a hill that goes up, up into the clouds as though it had no top. And a great way up the hillside she thought she saw some white things spread upon the grass. Lucy scrambled up the hill as fast as her stout legs would carry her. She ran along the steep pathway, up and up, until Littletown was right away down below. She could have dropped a pebble down the chimney. Presently she came to a spring bubbling out from the hillside. Someone had stood a tin can upon a stone to catch the water, but the water was already running over, for the can was no bigger than an egg cup, and where the sand upon the path was wet, there were footmarks of a very small person. Lucy ran on and on. The path ended under a big rock. The grass was short and green, and there were clothes, props cut from bracken stems with lines of plaited rushes, and a heap of tiny clothespins, but no pocket handkerchiefs. But there was something else, a door, straight into the hill, and inside it someone was singing, "Lily white and clean, oh, with little frills between, oh, smooth and hot, red rusty spot, never here be seen, oh." Lucy knocked once, twice, and interrupted the song. A frightened voice called out, "Who's that?" Lucy opened the door, and what do you think there was inside the hill? A nice clean kitchen with a flagged floor and wooden beams, just like any other farm kitchen. Only the ceiling was so low that Lucy's head nearly touched it, and the pots and pans were small, and so was everything there. There was a nice hot singy smell, and at the table with an iron in her hand, stood a very stout, short person staring anxiously at Lucy. Her print gown was tucked up, and she was wearing a large apron over her striped petticoat. Her little black nose went sniffle, sniffle, snuffle, and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle, and underneath her cap, where Lucy had yellow curls, that little person had prickles. "Who are you?" said Lucy. "Have you seen my pocket handkins?" The little person made a bob curtsy. "Oh, yes, if you please, my name is Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. Oh, yes, if you please, I'm an excellent clear starcher." And she took something out of a clothes basket and spread it on the ironing blanket. "What's that thing?" said Lucy. "That's not my pocket handkin." "Oh, no, if you please, that's a little scarlet waistcoat belonging to Cock Robin." And she ironed it and folded it and put it on one side. Then she took something else off a clothes horse. "That isn't my pinny," said Lucy. "Oh, no, if you please, that's a damask tablecloth belonging to Jenny Wren. Look how it's stained with currant wine. It's very bad to wash," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle's nose went sniffle, sniffle, snuffle, and her eyes went twinkle, twinkle, and she fetched another hot iron from the fire. "There's one of my pocket handkins," cried Lucy, "and there's my pinny." Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle ironed it and goffered it and shook out the frills. "Oh, that is lovely," said Lucy. "And what are those long yellow things with fingers like gloves?" "Oh, that's a pair of stockings belonging to Sally Hennypenny. Look how she's worn the heels out with scratching in the yard. She'll very soon go barefoot," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. "Why, there's another handkersniff, but it isn't mine. It's red." "Oh, no, if you please, that one belongs to old Mrs. Rabbit, and it did so smell of onions. I've had to wash it separately. I can't get out the smell." "There's another one of mine," said Lucy. "What are those funny little white things?" "That's a pair of mittens belonging to Tabby Kitten. I only have to iron them. She washes them herself." "There's my last pocket handkin," said Lucy. "And what are you dipping into the basin of starch?" "They're little dicky shirt fronts belonging to Tom Titmouse. Most terrible particular," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. "Now I've finished my ironing, I'm going to air some clothes." "What are these dear soft fluffy things?" said Lucy. "Oh, those are woolly coats belonging to the little lambs at Scalegill." "Will their jackets take off?" asked Lucy. "Oh, yes, if you please, Look at the sheep mark on the shoulder, and here's one mark for Gatesgarth, and 3 that come from Littletown. They're always marked at washing," said Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. And she hung up all sorts and sizes of clothes, small brown coats of mice, and one velvety black moleskin waistcoat, and a red tailcoat with no tail belonging to Squirrel Nutkin, and a very much shrunk blue jacket belonging to Peter Rabbit, and a petticoat not marked that had gone lost in the washing, and at last the basket was empty. Then Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle made tea, a cup for herself and a cup for Lucy. They sat down before the fire on a bench and looked sideways at one another. Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle's hand, holding the teacup, was very, very brown and very, very wrinkly with the soap suds, and all through her gown and her cap there were hairpins sticking wrong end out, so that Lucy didn't like to sit too near her. When they had finished tea, they tied up the clothes in bundles, and Lucy's pocket handkerchiefs were folded up inside her clean pinny and fastened with a silver safety pin. And then they made up the fire with turf, and came out and locked the door and hid the key under the door-sill. Then away down the hill trotted Lucy and Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle with the bundles of clothes. All the way down the path little animals came out of the fern to meet them. The very first that they met were Peter Rabbit and Benjamin Bunny, and she gave them their nice clean clothes. And all the little animals and birds were so very much obliged to dear Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle, so that at the bottom of the hill when they came to the stile there was nothing left to carry except Lucy's one little bundle. Lucy scrambled up the stile with the bundle in her hand, and then she turned to say, "Good night," and thank the washerwoman. But what a very odd thing! Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle had not waited either for thanks or for the washing bill. She was running up the hill, and where was her white frilled cap, and her shawl, and her gown, and her petticoat? And how small she had grown, and how brown, and covered with prickles! Why, Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle was nothing but a hedgehog. Now some people say that little Lucy had been asleep upon the stile. But then how could she have found 3 clean pocket handkins and a penny pinned with a silver safety pin? And besides, I have seen that door into the back of the hill called Cat Bell's. And besides, I am very well acquainted with dear Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle. End of the Tale of Mrs. Tiggy-Winkle.
The Tale of the Pie and the Patty Pan. Pussy-cat sits by the fire, how should she be fair? In walks the little dog, says Pussy, are you there? How do you do, Mistress Pussy? Mistress Pussy, how do you do? I thank you kindly, little dog, I fare as well as you. Once upon a time there was a pussy-cat called Ribby, who invited a little dog called Duchess to tea. "Come in good time, my dear Duchess," said Ribby's letter, "and we will have something so very nice. I am baking it in a pie dish with a pink rim. You never tasted anything so good, and you shall eat it all. I will eat muffins, my dear Duchess," wrote Ribby. Duchess read the letter and wrote an answer. "I will come with much pleasure at 4:15. But it is very strange. I was just going to invite you to come here to supper, my dear Ribby, to eat something most delicious." "I will come very punctually, my dear Ribby," wrote Duchess. And then at the end she added, "I hope it isn't Mouse." And then she thought that did not look quite polite, so she scratched out "isn't Mouse" and changed it to "I hope it will be fine," and she gave her letter to the postman. But she thought a great deal about Ribby's pie, and she read Ribby's letter over and over again. "I'm dreadfully afraid it will be Mouse," said Duchess to herself. "I really couldn't eat mouse pie, and I shall have to eat it, because it's a party, and my pie was going to be veal and ham, a pink and white pie dish, and so is mine, just like Ribby's dishes. They were both bought at Tabitha Twitchit's." Duchess went into her larder and took the pie off a shelf and looked at it. "It is all ready to put into the oven. Such a lovely pie crust, and I put in a little tin patty pan to hold up the crust, and I made a hole in the middle with a fork to let out the steam. Oh, I do wish I could eat my own pie instead of a pie made of mouse." Duchess considered and read Ribby's letter again. "A pink and white pie dish, and you shall eat it all. You means me. Then Ribby is not going to even taste the pie herself. A pink and white pie dish. Ribby is sure to go out to buy the muffins. Oh, what a good idea! Why shouldn't I rush along and put my pie into Ribby's oven when Ribby isn't there?" Duchess was quite delighted with her own cleverness, Ribby, in the meantime, had received Duchess's answer, and as soon as she was sure that the little dog could come, she popped her pie into the oven. There were 2 ovens, one above the other. Some oven knobs and handles were only ornamental and not intended to open. Ribby put the pie into the lower oven. The door was very stiff. "The top oven bakes too quickly," said Ribby to herself. "It is a pie of the most delicate and tender mouse minced up with bacon, and I have taken out all the bones, because Duchess did nearly choke herself with a fishbone last time I gave a party. She eats a little fast, rather big mouthfuls, but a most genteel and elegant little dog, infinitely superior company to Cousin Tabitha Twitchit." Ribby put on some coal and swept up the hearth. Then she went out with a can to the well for water to fill up the kettle. Then she began to set the room in order, for it was the sitting room as well as the kitchen. She shook the mats out at the front door and put them straight. The hearth-rug was a rabbit skin. She dusted the clock and the ornaments on the mantelpiece, and she polished and rubbed the tables and chairs. Then she spread a very clean white tablecloth and set out her best china tea set, which she took out of a wall cupboard near the fireplace. The teacups were white with a pattern of pink roses, and the dinner plates were white and blue. When Ribby had laid the table, she took a jug and a blue and white dish, and went out down the field to the farm to fetch milk and butter. When she came back, she peeped into the bottom oven. The pie looked very comfortable. Ribby put on her shawl and bonnet and went out again with a basket to the village shop to buy a packet of tea, a pound of lump sugar, and a pot of marmalade. And just at the same time, Duchess came out of her house at the other end of the village. Ribby met Duchess halfway down the street, also carrying a basket covered with a cloth. They only bowed to one another. They did not speak, because they were going to have a party. As soon as Duchess had gone round the corner out of sight, she simply ran straight away to Ribby's house. Ribby went into the shop and bought what she required, and came out after a pleasant gossip with Cousin Tabitha Twitchit. Cousin Tabitha was disdainful afterwards in conversation. "A little dog indeed, just as if there were no cats in Surrey, and a pie for afternoon tea, the very idea," said Cousin Tabitha Twitchit. Ribby went on to Timothy Baker's and bought the muffins. Then she went home. There seemed to be a sort of scuffling noise in the back passage as she was coming in at the front door. "I trust that is not that pie. The spoons are locked up, however," said Ribby. But there was nobody there. Ribby opened the bottom oven door with some difficulty and turned the pie. There began to be a pleasing smell of baked mouse. Duchess, in the meantime, had slipped out at the back door.
"It is a very odd thing that Ribby's pie was not in the oven when I put mine in, and I can't find it anywhere. I have looked all over the house. I put my pie into a nice hot oven at the top. I could not turn any of the other handles. I think that they are all shams," said Duchess. "But I wish I could have removed the pie made of mouse. I cannot think what she has done with it. I heard Ribby coming, and I had to run out by the back door."
Duchess went home and brushed her beautiful black coat, and then she picked a bunch of flowers in her garden as a present for Ribby, and passed the time until the clock struck 4. Ribby, having assured herself by careful search that there was really no one hiding in the cupboard or in the larder, went upstairs to change her dress. She put on a lilac silk gown for the party and an embroidered muslin apron and tippet. "It is very strange," said Ribby. "I do not think I left that drawer pulled out. Has somebody been trying on my mittens?" She came downstairs again and made the tea, and put the teapot on the hob. She peeped again into the bottom oven. The pie had become a lovely brown, and it was steaming hot. She sat down before the fire to wait for the little dog. "I am glad I used the bottom oven," said Ribby. "The top one would certainly have been very much too hot. I wonder why that cupboard door was open. Can there really have been someone in the house?" Very punctually at 4 o'clock, Duchess started to go to the party. She ran so fast through the village that she was too early, and she had to wait a little while in the lane that leads down to Ruby's house.
"I wonder if Ruby has taken my pie out of the oven yet,"
said Duchess.
"and whatever can have become of the other pie made of mouse?"
At 4:15 to the minute, there came a most genteel little tap-tappity.
"Is Mrs. Ribston at home?"
inquired Duchess in the porch. "Come in, and how do you do, my dear Duchess?" cried Ruby. "I hope I see you well."
"Quite well, I thank you. And how do you do, my dear Ruby?"
said Duchess.
"I brought you some flowers. What a delicious smell of pie!"
"Oh, what lovely flowers! Yes, it is mouse and bacon."
"Do not talk about food, my dear Ruby,"
said Duchess.
"What a lovely white tea-cloth! Is it done to a turn? Is it still in the oven?"
"I think it wants another 5 minutes," said Ruby. "Just a shade longer. I will pour out the tea while we wait. Do you take any sugar, my dear Duchess?"
"Oh, yes, please, my dear Ruby, and may I have a lump upon my nose?"
"With pleasure, my dear Duchess. How beautifully you beg! Oh, how sweetly pretty!" Duchess sat up with the sugar on her nose and sniffled.
"How good that pie smells! I do love veal and ham. I mean to say, mouse and bacon."
She dropped the sugar in confusion and had to go hunting under the tea table, so did not see which oven Ruby opened in order to get out the pie. Ruby set the pie upon the table. There was a very savoury smell. Duchess came out from under the tablecloth munching sugar, and sat upon a chair. "I will first cut the pie for you. I'm going to have muffin and marmalade," said Ruby.
"Do you really prefer muffin? Mind the patty pan."
"I beg your pardon," said Ruby.
"May I pass you the marmalade?"
said Duchess hurriedly. The pie proved extremely toothsome, and the muffins light and hot. They disappeared rapidly, especially the pie.
"I think,"
thought the Duchess to herself,
"I think it would be wiser if I helped myself to pie, though Ruby did not seem to notice anything when she was cutting it. What very small, fine pieces it is cooked into! I do not remember that I had minced it up so fine. I suppose this is a quicker oven than my own."
"How fast Duchess is eating," thought Ruby to herself, as she buttered her 5th muffin. The pie dish was emptying rapidly. Duchess had had 4 helps already and was fumbling with the spoon. "A little more bacon, my dear Duchess," said Ruby.
"Thank you, my dear Ruby. I was only feeling for the patty pan."
"The patty pan, my dear Duchess?"
"The patty pan that held up the pie crust,"
said Duchess, blushing under her black coat. "Oh, I didn't put one in, my dear Duchess," said Ruby. "I don't think that is necessary in pies made of mouse." Duchess fumbled with the spoon. "I can't find it," she said anxiously. "There isn't a patty pan," said Ruby, looking perplexed.
"Yes, indeed, my dear Ruby. Where can it have gone to?"
said Duchess. "There most certainly is not one, my dear Duchess. I disapprove of tin articles in puddings and pies. It is most undesirable, especially when people swallow in lumps," she added in a lower voice. Duchess looked very much alarmed and continued to scoop the inside of the pie dish. "My great-aunt Squintina, grandmother of cousin Tabitha Twitchit, died of a thimble in a Christmas plum pudding. I never put any article of metal in my puddings or pies." Duchess looked aghast and tilted up the pie dish. "I only have 4 patty pans, and they are all in the cupboard." Duchess set up a howl. "I shall die! I shall die! I have swallowed a patty pan! Oh, my dear Ruby, I do feel so ill!" "It is impossible, my dear Duchess. There was not a patty pan." Duchess moaned and whined and rocked herself about. "Oh, I feel so dreadful! I have swallowed a patty pan." "There was nothing in the pie," said Ruby severely. "Yes, there was, my dear Ruby. I am sure I have swallowed it." "Let me prop you up with a pillow, my dear Duchess. Where do you think you feel it?" Oh, I do feel so ill all over me, my dear Ruby. I have swallowed a large tin patty pan with a sharp scalloped edge. Shall I run for the doctor? I will just lock up the spoons. Oh, yes, yes. Fetch Dr. Maggotty, my dear Ruby. He is a pie himself. He will certainly understand. Ruby settled Duchess in an armchair before the fire and went out and hurried to the village to look for the doctor. She found him at the smithy. He was occupied in putting rusty nails into a bottle of ink, which he had obtained at the post office. "Gammon? Ha? Ha?" said he, with his head on one side. Ruby explained that her guest had swallowed a patty pan. "Spinach? Ha? Ha?" said he, and accompanied her with alacrity. He hopped so fast that Ruby had to run. It was most conspicuous. All the village could see that Ruby was fetching the doctor. "I knew they would overeat themselves," said Cousin Tabitha Twitchit. But while Ruby had been hunting for the doctor, a curious thing had happened to Duchess, who had been left by herself, sitting before the fire, sighing and groaning and feeling very unhappy.
How could I have swallowed it? Such a large thing as a patty pan.
She got up and went to the table, and felt inside the pie dish again with a spoon.
No, there is no patty pan, and I put one in, and nobody has eaten pie except me, so I must have swallowed it.
She sat down again and stared mournfully at the grate. The fire crackled and danced, and something sizzled. Duchess started. She opened the door of the top oven. Out came a rich, steamy flavour of veal and ham, and there stood a fine brown pie, and through a hole in the top of the pie crust there was a glimpse of a little tin patty pan. Duchess drew a long breath.
Then I must have been eating mouse. No wonder I feel ill. But perhaps I should feel worse if I had really swallowed a patty pan.
Duchess reflected.
What a very awkward thing to have to explain to Ruby. I think I will put my pie in the backyard and say nothing about it. When I go home, I will run around and take it away.
She put it outside the back door and sat down again by the fire and shut her eyes. When Ruby arrived with the doctor, she seemed fast asleep. "Gammon? Ha? Ha?" said the doctor.
I am feeling very much better,
said Duchess, waking up with a jump. "I am truly glad to hear it. He has brought you a pill, my dear Duchess."
I think I should feel quite well if he only felt my pulse,
said Duchess, backing away from the magpie, who sidled up with something in his beak. "It is only a bread pill. You had much better take it. Drink a little milk, my dear Duchess." "Gammon? Gammon?" said the doctor, while Duchess coughed and choked. "Don't say that again," said Ruby, losing her temper. "Here, take this bread and jam, and get out into the yard." "Gammon and spinach, ha, ha, ha!" shouted Dr. Maggotty triumphantly outside the back door.
I am feeling very much better, my dear Ruby,
said Duchess.
Do you not think that I had better go home before it gets dark?
Perhaps it might be wise, my dear Duchess. I will lend you a nice warm shawl, and you shall take my arm.
I would not trouble you for worlds. I feel wonderfully better. One pill of Dr. Maggotty.
Indeed, it is most admirable, if it has cured you of a patty pan. I will call directly after breakfast to ask how you have slept. Ruby and Duchess said good-bye affectionately, and Duchess started home. Halfway up the lane she stopped and looked back. Ruby had gone in and shut the door. Duchess slipped through the fence and ran round to the back of Ruby's house and peeped into the yard. Upon the roof of the pigsty sat Dr. Maggotty and 3 jackdaws. The jackdaws were eating pie crust, and the magpie was drinking gravy out of a patty pan. "Gammon, ha, ha!" he shouted when he saw Duchess's little black nose peeping round the corner. Duchess ran home feeling uncommonly silly. When Ruby came out for a pail full of water to wash up the tea things, she found a pink and white pie dish lying smashed in the middle of the yard. The patty pan was under the pump, where Dr. Maggotty had considerately left it. Ruby stared with amazement.
Did you ever see the like? So there really was a patty pan.
But my patty pans are all in the kitchen cupboard. Well, I never did. Next time I want to give a party, I will invite Cousin Tabitha Twitchit. End of The Tale of the Pie and the Patty Pan.
The Tale of Mr. Jeremy Fisher. Once upon a time, there was a frog called Mr. Jeremy Fisher. He lived in a little damp house amongst the buttercups at the edge of the pond. The water was all slippy sloppy in the larder and in the back passage. But Mr. Jeremy liked getting his feet wet. Nobody ever scolded him, and he never caught a cold. He was quite pleased when he looked out and saw large drops of rain splashing in the pond. "I will get some worms and go fishing and catch a dish of minnows for my dinner," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. "If I catch more than 5 fish, I will invite my friends Mr. Alderman Totlemy Tortoise and Sir Isaac Newton. The alderman, however, eats salad." Mr. Jeremy put on a mackintosh and a pair of shiny goloshes. He took his rod and basket and set off with enormous hops to the place where he kept his boat. The boat was round and green, and very like the other lily leaves. It was tied to a water plant in the middle of the pond. Mr. Jeremy took a reed pole and pushed the boat out into open water. "I know a good place for minnows," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. Mr. Jeremy stuck his pole into the mud and fastened the boat to it. Then he settled himself cross-legged and arranged his fishing tackle. He had the dearest little red float. His rod was a tough stalk of grass. His line was a fine long white horsehair, and he tied a little wriggling worm at the end. The rain trickled down his back, and for nearly an hour he stared at the float. "This is getting tiresome. I think I should like some lunch," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. He punted back again amongst the water plants and took some lunch out of his basket. "I will eat a butterfly sandwich and wait till the shower is over," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. A great big water beetle came up underneath the lily leaf and tweaked the toe of one of his goloshes. Mr. Jeremy crossed his legs up shorter, out of reach, and went on eating his sandwich. Once or twice, something moved about with a rustle and a splash amongst the rushes at the side of the pond. "I trust that is not a rat," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. "I think I had better get away from here." Mr. Jeremy shoved the boat out again a little way and dropped in the bait. There was a bite almost directly. The float gave a tremendous bobbit. "A minnow! A minnow! I have him by the nose!" cried Mr. Jeremy Fisher, jerking up his rod. But what a horrible surprise! Instead of a smooth, fat minnow, Mr. Jeremy landed little Jack Sharp the stickleback, covered with spines. The stickleback floundered about the boat, pricking and snapping until he was quite out of breath. Then he jumped back into the water, and a shoal of other little fishes put their heads out and laughed at Mr. Jeremy Fisher. And while Mr. Jeremy sat disconsolately on the edge of his boat, sucking his sore fingers and peering down into the water, a much worse thing happened. A really frightful thing it would have been if Mr. Jeremy had not been wearing a mackintosh. A great big enormous trout came up, kerf, with a splash, and it seized Mr. Jeremy with a snap. "Oi, oi, oi!" And then it turned and dived down to the bottom of the pond. But the trout was so displeased with the taste of the mackintosh that in less than half a minute it spat him out again, and the only thing it swallowed was Mr. Jeremy's goloshes. Mr. Jeremy bounced up to the surface of the water like a cork and the bubbles out of a soda water bottle, and he swam with all his might to the edge of the pond. He scrambled out on the first bank he came to, and he hopped home across the meadow with his mackintosh all in tatters. "What a mercy that was not a pike," said Mr. Jeremy Fisher. "I have lost my rod and basket, but it does not much matter, for I am sure I should never have dared to go fishing again. He put some sticking plaster on his fingers, and his friends both came to dinner. He could not offer them fish, but he had something else in his larder. Sir Isaac Newton wore his black and gold waistcoat. And Mr. Alderman Totlemy Tortoise brought a salad with him in a string bag. And instead of a nice dish of minnows, they had a roasted grasshopper with ladybird sauce, which frogs consider a beautiful treat, but I think it must have been nasty. The end. End of The Tale of Mr. Jeremy Fisher.